Jack's ship hit the trees like thunder. Flames rose behind it, and smoke curled into the purple sky. Branches snapped, and metal scraped as the old explorer pod slid down the side of the hill. Then everything was quiet, except for the crackling of fire and the sound of leaves falling. Jack groaned as he opened the emergency hatch. His left arm was bleeding, and his shoulder was bruised, but he was alive, and that was rare for crash landings like this. The planet wasn't on any Earth map, and his communicator was broken. He needed shelter, food, and a way to survive. At least until someone came looking for him. If anyone would, he walked through the thick alien forest. The trees were tall and glowing, and the ground was soft with blue moss. Strange birds flew above, and tiny creatures with too many legs ran under his boots. Jack stayed alert, his knife ready in his hand. Then he heard it, a small sound like crying, but not human. It was coming from behind a fallen log, just a few feet away. Jack crouched low and moved slowly, his heart beating fast. When he peeked over the log, his breath caught in his throat. There, curled into a ball, was a tiny alien girl, no bigger than a house cat. Her skin was pale purple and glowing softly, her thin arms wrapped tightly around her knees. She had large eyes, glowing blue, and small wings folded behind her back. She was shaking, covered in dirt and leaves, and crying softly. Jack didn't move for a moment, afraid she might vanish like a dream. Then, gently, he whispered, "Hey, are you okay?" The little alien's head snapped up, and her eyes locked onto him. Wide with fear, she screamed, a high, sharp sound that echoed through the trees. Then she tried to run, but her leg gave out, and she collapsed again. Jack raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. "It's okay, I won't hurt you," he said, voice calm. But she didn't understand his words, only his size, his shape, his strange face. She thought he was a predator, a monster, maybe the kind that eats small ones like her. She growled weakly, baring tiny teeth, and when Jack took a step closer, she bit his glove and scratched his arm. Then she limped away into the bushes, vanishing into the glowing plants. "Oh yeah." Jack cursed under his breath, but didn't chase her not. Yet, instead, he followed the blood trail she left behind. Careful not to scare her more, he found her again by a quiet stream. Trying to clean the wound on her leg, she was breathing fast, weak from blood loss. And still watching for him, Jack didn't say anything this time. He just sat down a few feet away, opened a ration pack, and slowly began eating. He noticed her eyes flick toward the food, then away, then back again. She was hungry, very hungry. But still scared, Jack tore off a small piece of bread and placed it on a flat rock between them. Then he leaned back and waited. Minutes passed, and finally, she crawled forward, eyes never leaving his face. She took the bread, sniffed it, then ate it in 2 quick bites. Jack smiled softly. "See? I'm not that scary." She didn't understand the words, but his tone calmed her, just a little. He offered her some water next, and she drank it, still watching him like a frightened animal. Then she sat beside the rock, too tired to run again, but still ready to flee if needed. Jack didn't try to touch her. Instead, he built a small fire nearby, careful not to scare her with the sparks. He pulled out a thermal blanket and laid it near the fire. Then he sat with his back against a tree, eyes half closed, but always alert. The little alien girl moved closer to the warmth, her body trembling. She lay down near the fire, but kept glancing at Jack. He could see it in her eyes, the fear, the confusion, the question, "Why didn't you eat me?" He didn't have an answer, not one she'd understand anyway. He just watched her and whispered quietly, "You're not food. You're someone." Her eyes blinked slowly, and she curled into a small ball. Finally resting, Jack stayed awake. Knife in hand, protecting a tiny creature who didn't know if he was her savior or her end. But something had changed in her eyes, something that said, maybe, just maybe, she'd give him a chance. Jack woke up before sunrise, the alien forest around him still dark and full of whispers. His eyes searched for the small figure by the fire, and there she was, curled under the edge of the thermal blanket. Her tiny chest moved slowly, and her face was finally peaceful. He didn't move, not yet, afraid that any sudden sound might break the moment. When the light grew brighter, soft golden beams filtered through the trees. The girl opened her eyes, blinked twice, and looked around quickly. She saw Jack, still sitting with his arms crossed, and his knife resting beside him. She froze, her body stiff like she was ready to run again. Jack picked up a water bottle and placed it near her, then backed away. He said nothing, just pointed at the bottle, then sat down by the tree again. She didn't trust him fully, not yet, but her thirst won, and she reached out for the bottle. The way her tiny hands gripped it made Jack realize just how small she really was. She tried to drink, but spilled some on herself, and she flinched, like she expected to be yelled at. Jack smiled gently. "It's all right, kid. Just drink slow." His voice was soft, his tone patient, even though he knew she couldn't understand the words. But somehow, she seemed to feel the kindness in them. For the rest of the day, they stayed near the stream. Jack boiled some roots and alien fruits he found, hoping none were poisonous. She sniffed everything carefully before touching it, like she had seen bad things before. Jack offered her a cooked slice of root, and this time, she didn't wait too long to take it. As the sun moved across the sky, she began to mimic his movements. When Jack pointed at something and said a word, she would tilt her head and try to repeat the sound. Her voice was soft and strange, like chimes made of crystal. Jack laughed the first time she tried to say water, and ended up saying, "Wada-woo." That night, something changed while Jack was fixing the campfire. The girl walked over to him. Holding a piece of his torn jacket, she gently tugged at it and looked into his eyes. Then she pressed her hand to her chest and made a small sound. "Tika." Jack blinked. "Tika." She nodded once, slow and serious. He smiled. "Okay, Tika." "I'm Jack." She tilted her head, confused, but repeated Jock. Close enough, he thought. They sat together under the stars, the fire crackling gently beside them. Jack looked up at the night sky, wondering if Earth even knew he was alive. Would rescue come? Could he fix the beacon in the wreck? Or was this planet his new home? He glanced at Tika, who was sitting quietly near his leg. Tracing circles in the dirt with one finger, she was still a mystery, still scared. But something in her had started to trust him. He could feel it in the way she stayed close, even when she could have run. But Jack also knew this place wasn't safe as the wind shifted. He felt it in his gut. Something was watching them. He stood up slowly, listening to the trees. The silence too perfect, Tika noticed too. Her small ears twitching as she turned to look into the darkness. And then came the low humming sound, deep and sharp, a mechanical buzz that didn't belong in a forest. Tika gasped and ran behind Jack's legs, her little hands clutching his. Pants tightly, he stepped forward, knife drawn, eyes scanning the shadows. A dark shape floated through the trees, smooth and silent, with blinking red lights on its sides. A drone, not human-made, but alien something hunting. Jack backed away slowly, keeping Tika behind him. The drone paused, scanned the area, then moved on without a word. Jack waited until it disappeared into the distance, then looked down at the trembling girl. "What the hell was that, Tika?" She didn't answer, just buried her face into his leg and whispered something he couldn't understand. But one word stuck in his ears, something she had said between tiny sobs. "Run." Jack stared into the darkness, his jaw tight. This planet wasn't empty, and she wasn't just some lost child. She was running from something. Something with machines, something organized, something that wanted her back. He knelt beside her, placed a hand on her shoulder, and spoke gently. "You're not alone anymore." She looked up, eyes wide, glowing with fear and something else, hope, and far above them, hidden in the clouds, something else. Listen to. The real hunters were already on their way. Jack didn't sleep that night. The fire burned low, but he stayed awake, staring into the trees. Knife resting across his lap, Tika curled beside him under the blanket. Her little body pressed close to the warmth. Every now and then, her wings twitched in her sleep, and she whispered something in a language he didn't understand. He kept thinking about the drone. It wasn't random, it was searching, scanning, hunting. And Tika's reaction hadn't been fear of the unknown. It had been recognition. At dawn, Jack climbed the small ridge near the stream to get a better view. The shipwreck was far behind them, smoke still rising in thin trails. No rescue beacons were working, and there was no signal from orbit. He was alone, but not completely not. Anymore, when he returned to the camp, Tika was gone. His heart jumped, and he shouted her name, "Tika! Tika!" No reply, just the wind moving through the trees. He ran through the underbrush, following small footprints in the moss. Then he heard a quiet sobbing from behind a wide tree root. She was there, kneeling in the dirt, drawing something with a stick. He didn't speak, just walked slowly closer, and looked at what she was drawing. It wasn't a game, was a story. A tall, dark tower, surrounded by cages, rows of them. Inside each cage were small figures like her, curled up, crying. Jack knelt beside her, silent. Tika drew another Amiga machine, long and sharp, with lights and arms. She then pointed to her leg, where the scar ran across her skin. Jack understood, even without words. She had escaped from that place. Her hand moved again, drawing tall, shadowy creatures with long arms and no faces. Then she drew herself, running away, while drones followed from the sky. She dropped the stick and hugged her knees, shaking again. Jack put a hand on her shoulder, gently, and she didn't pull away this time. "They took you," he said softly. "They hurt you?" Tika didn't answer, but a tear rolled down her glowing cheek. She looked up at him and pointed at his chest, then made a small motion like wings spreading. Jack didn't understand at first, until she said a word in a broken voice, "Safe." It broke something inside him. He didn't know how to fix her pain, or protect her from the monsters she escaped, but he could stay, fight, help, whatever it took. She wasn't just some lost alien anymore. She was a child, and she had no one else. That evening, Jack built a higher shelter with walls of branches and stone. He sharpened sticks and placed traps near the edges of camp. He showed Tika how to hide quickly, how to stay low, how to stay silent. She followed his moves carefully, learning fast. She didn't speak much, but her eyes showed she understood everything. After dinner, she sat close to him, holding a rock and trying to carve a shape into it with another stone. She handed it to him when she was done. Looked like a rough figure of him with wide arms. Jack smiled, touched by the gesture, and kept it beside his fire pouch. But deep down, his chest felt tight because he knew something was coming. He could feel it in the way the birds flew lower, in the silence between the wind, in the fact that Tika, no matter how tired she was, didn't sleep at all that night. She just sat by the fire, her small hands gripping the corner of the blanket, watching the shadows like they might come alive. And somewhere out there, past the glowing trees and quiet rivers, someone or something was following the trail she left behind. Slowly, carefully, hunting what they thought still belonged to them. But they didn't know the human had found her first, and they didn't know he was willing to bleed for her or kill for her. Not yet. The sky turned red that evening, not with sunset but with warning. Jack stood on the edge of the cliffside clearing. Scanning the horizon, he had seen something, just for a second, a flash of silver. High in the trees, not a bird, not a cloud, a drone. Again, Tika stood behind him, silent as always. But this time, her fingers were tightly gripping the stone figure she had carved for him. Jack knew she had sensed it too. Something was close. To close now, he grabbed his gear homemade spears, sharpened bones, and a shock battery pulled from his wrecked pod. They weren't much, but they would have to do. He placed a small pulse mine under the moss near the path, then hid it with leaves. Every few steps, he added more trap-slow wire, swinging logs. Pointed sticks buried in the dirt. Tika watched him without speaking, her eyes serious. No fear. This time, she mimicked his movements, tying knots, setting lures. It was strange, Jack thought, how she had become more like a soldier than a child. But that's what pain does, it steals childhood early. Later that night, Jack sat, sharpening his blade under the firelight. Tika was asleep, curled beside him. One hand on his leg, as if to make sure he wouldn't leave, he looked down at her, wondering how something so small had survived this long. How many others like her had never escaped. Many still suffered in those cages. His fingers tightened around the blade handle. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He had a mission now, and nothing was going to stop him. The forest was still for hours, too still. Then the wind shifted, and Jack smelled metal, burnt oil, and plasma dust. He stood slowly, reaching for his knife, eyes locked on the tree line. The first drone appeared like a ghost, gliding low between the trunks. It was different from before. This one had weapons. Sharp claws that spun slowly as it scanned. It made no sound, but Jack could feel its focus. It wasn't looking for a target. It was hunting a prize. Jack didn't wait. He triggered the mine with a silent remote press. A flash of blue light shot through the clearing boom. The drone crashed into a tree with sparks flying from its sits. Body, but more followed, 2, then 3 more, entering from different angles. Circling like wolves, Jack yelled to Tika, and she snapped awake, already running toward the hidden shelter. He fought the first drone with fire and metal, cutting deep into its sensor core before it could lock on him. The second shot a net. But Jack rolled aside and threw a spear straight into its intake vent. Sparks exploded across the moss floor. He turned, expecting to see the third, but it wasn't coming for him. It was going for Tika. She was climbing up the rocks behind the camp, fast and light like a squirrel. But the drone followed, and Jack screamed, no. He ran harder than he'd ever run in his life, his leg burning, lungs on fire. The drone closed the distance, its claw reaching out. Then suddenly it froze mid-air, its systems buzzing. Tika had jumped onto its back and shoved Jack's spare battery into the intake. The drone dropped to the ground. Dead weight. She stood on top of it, chest rising fast, arms wide like she was ready to fight another. Jack reached her in seconds, picked her up, and hugged her close. She trembled in his arms, but she didn't cry. Instead, she whispered something he had never heard her say before. Fight. Together, Jack looked into her eyes, and for the first time, he didn't see fear. He saw fire. They weren't running anymore. From this moment on, they were fighting back. The smoke hadn't cleared by morning. Broken drone pieces still lay scattered across the moss. Jack stood guard all night, his arms aching, legs stiff. Knife never leaving his hand. Tika slept close, wrapped in the blanket, but even in her sleep, her fingers were clenched into fists. They both knew it wasn't over. What came last night was just a scouting wave. The real hunters would come soon, the ones who wouldn't stop. Not until they dragged her back in chains. Jack started packing what little they had. The camp was no longer safe. They needed higher ground, better shelter, more time. But his wounds slowed, him one leg, wrapped in cloth soaked dark with blood. His steps were uneven now, heavier, harder. Tika noticed, of course. She kept walking. Beside him, watching every stumble, her brows pressed in concern. When he sat down to rest near a fallen log, she tore up her own blanket and tried to wrap his leg. Her small hands weren't strong, but they were careful, gentle. He didn't say a word, just let her do it, even though the pain made him grit his teeth. Later, they found a cave by a cliff wall, hidden behind thick hanging vines. It smelled of old rock and clean water. A small spring ran along the edge. Jack nodded. We'll stay here. Tika was already gathering dry branches and placing stones in a circle for a fire. She didn't need to be told any more. She just acted like a partner, like someone who had chosen to help. That night, Jack's fever worsened. He shivered even by the fire, sweat rolling down his face. His breath shallow, he barely heard Tika calling him, her voice trembling, afraid. She ran out into the woods with a torch in one hand and her sharp rock in the other. The forest was alive with whispers and strange lights. But she moved with purpose, eyes scanning every root, every plant, every shadow. She remembered what he had shown her, what smelled like medicine, what glowed with heat when burned. She found the moss, the purple-tipped root, and a stringy vine he once boiled for tea. Then she ran back, slipping once, scraping her knee, but never stopping. When she returned, Jack was barely conscious. She mashed the roots, mixed the moss into a paste, and placed it over his wound. Then she sat beside him all night, placing wet cloths on his forehead and whispering the only word she could say that felt safe, Papa. The fever broke just before dawn. Jack opened his eyes and saw her curled beside him, her head on his chest, asleep at last. He touched her hair gently and whispered, "You saved me." She stirred, blinked up at him, and smiled, just a little. In that moment, she didn't look like a scared little creature anymore. She looked like family. The cave gave them 3 more days. Time to rest, time to heal, time to prepare. Jack fixed the old beacon from his escape pod. Attaching it to the top of the cliff near the cave, he boosted the signal, hoping anyone would hear it across the stars. Tika watched the sky every night after that, her eyes scanning the stars. She didn't speak, but Jack knew what she was thinking. She wasn't just watching for hunters anymore. She was watching for hope, but on the 4th night, there were no stars. Only fire in the sky, bright red flashes blinking in the clouds. The real ones had arrived. Asterisk red flashes tore across the clouds like angry scars. Tika didn't need to ask what they meant. She had seen this before. The hunters had arrived, not drones this time, but ships, real ones, big, fast, full of claws and cages. Jack stood on the cliff, wind slamming against his face. Holding the beacon tight in his arms, he had just sent out a signal. Now he had no way to know if anyone had heard it, and no time to wait and find out. The ships landed far, but not far enough. Their lights cut through the forest like knives, sweeping across the trees. Jack knew they were searching for heat, for sound, for movement. Soon they would find the cave, and then there would be no more running. He went back inside, breathing hard, blood soaking through his shirt again. Tika was already packing their things, what little they had left. She looked at him and pointed toward the rocks above the cave. He understood her without words. They would make their stand there. Jack climbed the ridge with her help, his arm over her shoulder. It was strange, this tiny alien girl supporting a full-grown man, but she never complained, not once. Together, they reached the top and hid behind the stone wall. Below them, dark shapes moved through the tree stall. Faceless shadows, they moved silently. No words, no signals. They knew what they wanted, and they had come to take it back. Jack looked at Tika, handed her the last shock grenade, and whispered, only if they get close. She nodded once, holding it close to her chest like it was made of gold. Then she leaned her head against his arm and closed her eyes for just a moment, not to sleep, but to gather strength. The first hunter appeared just before dawn. Its armor shimmered like glass, body too tall and too thin to be real. It didn't walk, it floated. And its long arms carried tools Jack didn't want to understand. He waited, heartbeat slow, mind quiet. Then he threw a spear straight at its chest. The weapon bounced off, but it made the hunter stop and scan, and that was enough time. Jack threw a flare behind it, lighting up the trees. More shadows moved, 3 more hunters, now alert, one aimed at the cliff, energy building at its palm. Jack rolled aside as a bolt of white fire cracked the stone near his head. Tika stood up then, small and bright and furious. She hurled the shock grenade straight into their middle. The flash lit up the forest like lightning. 2 hunters dropped, systems fried, but the third one didn't fall, roared without a mouth. Its arms stretched and launched a net of glowing chains. Jack stepped forward and caught it mid-air, pulling it toward him. He triggered the last trap blade from the beacon's broken antenna right into its chest. The machine screamed, lights flickering, before crashing to the ground. Silence followed, heavy and cold. Jack dropped to one knee, gasping, his body failing. Tika ran to him, her hands on his face, whispering, "No, no, Papa, no." He looked at her and smiled. "It's okay. You're safe now." His hand reached for the beacon's final switch. The emergency pulse, he pressed it, and a burst of white light shot into the sky. A new sound filled the air one Tika had never heard before. A deep rumble, steady and strong. She turned her head and saw it far above the clouds. A human rescue ship cutting through the red sky like a blade. Jack fell back, breathing slow. Tika screamed, shaking him, trying to wake him. But he didn't move, not right away. The human. Ship landed hard, engines burning the ground, soldiers poured out, guns raised, eyes wide when they saw the hunter wreckage. They found Tika clutching Jack's shirt, crying in a voice that sounded like glass breaking. They tried to pull her away, but she held on tighter. One soldier dropped to a knee and placed a hand on her back. "It's okay, little one," he said. "We're here." Then Jack coughed, weak but alive. Don't take her away from me," he whispered. The soldier's eyes widened. "He's still breathing. Get the med kit." Tika looked down at Jack and smiled through her tears. He was broken, bleeding, half dead, but he had won, and he had never let go. The stars looked different from space. Tika pressed her small face against the window of the human ship, eyes wide as the dark sky stretched around them. No cages, no forest, no red lights chasing her anymore. Just stars, endless, silent stars. She had never seen this much sky before. Jack lay in a medical bed nearby. Wrapped in white bandages, machines beeped beside him, tubes in his arms, but his chest rose and fell, slow and steady. The doctors had said he was lucky. Tika didn't understand most of their words, but she understood one thing: he was still alive. She hadn't left his side since they brought him aboard. Even when the guards tried to take her for processing, she had clung to him. She didn't want another cage, not ever again. The captain of the ship, a woman with tired eyes and gray hair, knelt beside her later that night. "We don't know what species you are, sweetheart," she said gently, "but you're safe now, and no one's going to take you away." Tika didn't answer, just stared at Jack. Her tiny fingers gripped the corner of his blanket, like if she let go, he might disappear again. When they reached Earth, it was morning. Jack was taken to a clean, quiet hospital filled with glass walls and green plants. Tika followed every step of the way, holding his hand. People stared at her, some curious, some afraid, some whispering. Words like alien and test subject She didn't understand why, but she didn't care either. She had Jack, and that was enough. Weeks passed, and Jack finally woke. His voice was rough. But when he said her name, she lit up like a sunrise. Tika, he whispered. You're still here. She nodded, eyes wet, and pressed her forehead to his chest. I stay, she said, the word shaky but clear. I stay with Papa. But the humans had rules. They said she had no name, no papers, no species classification. Some of them wanted to send her to a research facility for study, they said. Jack, still weak and barely walking, stood up in court with a cane in one hand and Tika in the other. She's not a thing to study, he growled. She's my daughter. The room went quiet. The judges looked down, whispered to one another, confused, uncertain. Then Tika stepped forward, stood in front of everyone, and held up the little stone figure she had carved. She placed it on the floor, right between the rows of chairs. Her voice was tiny, but the silence helped it carry. Papa saved me, she said. Not eat me, she added quickly. Protect me. Then she turned to Jack and pointed at her own chest. I belong here. The room stayed still for a long time. Then someone began to clap, and soon others joined. Slowly, like a wall had cracked open in their hearts. The judges didn't speak much after that. They just stamped the paper and said one word, approved. Years passed. Tika grew taller, her wings stronger, her voice brighter. She went to school with other human children, though she always stood out. But no one dared bully her. Not when her father came to every meeting, every event, always watching, always near. Sometimes people still asked how they met. She would laugh and say, I thought he'd eat me. And Jack would shake his head with a smile, and she almost bit my hand off. They would both laugh, though their eyes always held more than words could say. And on quiet nights when the stars were out, Tika would sit on the porch and watch the sky. Not because she was afraid anymore, but because she hoped maybe one day she'd find others like her, not alone, not in cages, not hunted, but free. And when she did, she would tell them, there is a place beyond the trees, beyond fear, where monsters become fathers, and little girls grow into warriors, all because one human didn't turn away. He stayed, and that changed everything.